I had a client who asked me about it. I was working in a rehab hospital and I had a client and their spouse said things are going okay at home when we are at home. But one of the difficulties that we're really having is in the bedroom. And I was so ill equipped and so ill prepared to have that conversation. And it sent me down this whole rabbit hole where I was like, oh, who do I send this person to? And I didn't really have an answer to that because not only did I not have access to a sex therapist in the rehab hospital, but my impression was that they probably wouldn't know what to do with aphasia anyway.
Rebuild life. This is life beyond aphasia.
I am thrilled to bring a researcher, speech pathologist, intimacy expert to our show today. We've been talking about intimacy after aphasia, and it's one of these topics that bring up a lot of emotion with both persons with aphasia and those that are their spouses, care partners, significant others. We can get dialogue started so that you can have the life that you want, the life that you deserve. And intimacy for many of us is very important.
My name is Laura Wolford. I am a faculty member at MGH Institute of Health Professions. I have a small private practice that I run called the Spice Institute that specifically works on intimacy, sexuality, and relationships after a person has aphasia or another communication disorder. And I am an ASAC certified sexuality educator. And if it was actually the aphasia that was difficult and making things difficult, then I was the person who was addressing the aphasia. And so I needed to get real comfortable real quick. And that
Yeah.
sent me on a journey. And here I am.
So, how does aphasia impact intimacy?
The researcher in me wants to say, we don't have an incredible amount of research in this area. The research that we currently have about the impacts of aphasia on intimacy indicate like there is an impact. There is an impact of aphasia that happens above and beyond the other impacts of the stroke or the traumatic brain injury, like any kind of physical stuff that might be occurring. The clinician in me says, "Hoo boy, my experience with my clients tells me that aphasia we know is the sort of thing that impacts just about every aspect of life, right? It impacts how we communicate with other people, but in addition to just impacting like the words that we say and the way that we put them together, it also impacts how we see ourselves as people. It impacts the relationship itself, the feelings of closeness in that relationship, the stresses in that relationship, and all of that impacts the quality of the relationship itself and feelings of intimacy and also like sexual intimacy because all of those things are really very entwined together.
It's mostly the care partners that bring this up, just much like your
Mhm.
example and what sent you down that rabbit hole. They find that their identity has shifted so much because now they're in this caretaking role, especially in the early days, because there
Mhm.
may be physical changes with their loved one who's come home. So now they are doing helping with activities of daily living. They are having to manage both roles.
And all of that is stressful. And you add on top of that the feelings of guilt and anxiety that can show up in a caretaking role, the feelings of loss. There's grief, right? There's so much grief for the life that you had before, for everything that happened before the stroke or the brain injury. And so, in addition to the change, there's all of this emotional stuff that's going on. For most people, stress isn't sexy. So that already is a libido killer. And in addition to all of that, here now we have two people who I don't think it's an overstatement to say don't know each other anymore. Suddenly, they don't know themselves anymore because they don't know who they are in this role. Who am I as a caretaker of my spouse? I've never been that person before. Who am I as the sole breadwinner? Who am I as the person who does X, Y, and Z that I didn't used to do? Who am I as a person in this role? And
Mm.
then for the person who has aphasia, who am I as a person who cannot communicate the person that I am as well as I used to be able to? Who am I as a person who has a new disability identity that I might not have had before? Who am I as a person who no longer understands my embodied experience in this body, especially if my body sensations have changed, the way that I move has changed, the way that I look has changed. So my body no longer feels like my own, and I don't trust it. And usually I don't like it. And all of that is not sexy, too. And then, in addition to all of that stuff, we
Yeah, right.
haven't even touched the aphasia.
That's right.
We have not touched the aphasia, which means that it is so hard to communicate about all of this. It is already so emotional. It is already so taxing. I don't know if I want to burden my partner with all of this information and all of these emotions. And they're already going through so much. And I see it and I'm grateful for them. Communication is hard. And we know that communication is so hard, especially with things that are nebulous and non-concrete. It's one thing to be able to say, please pass me the fork. It's another thing to be able to talk about your emotions. And then also when you have an emotional reaction, when that heart starts beating, when the cortisol levels rise, when you get anxious, when the hairs on the back of your neck stand up, communication goes out the window. It's so complicated.
It is. Our folks need to feel like they are being understood, that we get from a professional standpoint what they're going through, and that we're trying to help bridge that gap.
When I would ask about intimacy, they would be so surprised, but also I would say more often than not, they would cry. And they would cry because it's such a humanizing question, and it's such a humanizing part of life.
When you're going through the traditional rehab system, there's a path and there's time and there's restrictions.
It's
So
very institutional.
let's talk about, from your research, from your experience, how, if the spouse were to come to you, you've opened the door, they walk through it and they say, Laura, what do I do? I don't know who my husband is anymore.
What would you like that conversation to look like with your partner? Have you had that conversation with your partner? Have you talked about intimacy at all? Has it come up? Sometimes the answer is just 100% no. Sometimes the answer is yes, it came. We tried once. We didn't talk about it. We tried once. And if they're bringing this conversation to me, usually it hasn't gone super well for one reason or another. The research would tell me that there's a lot of that intimacy often dies a little death after stroke. And there's a lot of reasons for that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. One of the other things that I would do is try to provide them hope. Just like intimacy provides asking about intimacy has provided me a real window into connection with my clients. Talking about intimacy together often provides a real open door for more emotional intimacy between the spouses or partners. So, one of the difficulties that I have found, and the literature would support this, although not specifically with aphasia, but the literature with stroke would support that often we have these two really diverging paths with the partner and the person who's had a stroke, where the partner feels so much burden and so much weight of being the caretaker, and they feel like they cannot speak about that with the person who's had a stroke
Mm.
because they do not want to add that burden to their partner, to the one that they love, because they know that it will be painful for them. And so they don't talk about really what is their primary life experience at the moment. And then the person who's had a stroke doesn't want to complain. Everybody's dancing around this thing that everybody already knows. They know that this must be hard for their partner. They see that it's hard for their partner. They're going through this huge life change about who they are and how they feel about themselves. And they don't feel like they can talk about that with their spouse or partner either, because look how much my spouse is going through as this new caretaker in their new role, how hard it is for them. And the longer you don't talk about it, the more that shift can grow. In my mind, I'm thinking of that fork in the road being so far because you did not talk about this with your spouse. And I have a suspicion as to why. It feels like you can't. There's no such thing as individual intimacy with your partner. You have to do it together, which means having that first uncomfortable conversation.
And that brings up with aphasia. Depending on the recovery path of the person with aphasia, they may have all these feelings in them, but not have the words to express. It just depends. Each aphasia is very different from the next. And who that person was before the aphasia is, there's a lot of layers. So if we were to start that conversation, if we were to help as the speech pathologist start that conversation, how could that possibly go? Just to
I,
put you on the spot.
no, so the first thing that I love to do is normalize it. Aphasia in and of itself doesn't necessarily inherently mean that intimacy has to decrease. You don't necessarily have the more severe your aphasia, the more severe your intimacy changes. That's not necessarily, that doesn't have to be a thing. But aphasia gets in the middle of stuff. It gets in the way of a lot of stuff. If we know that the interest is there, if both partners are consenting and agree that this is a thing that they want to revive in their lives, have in their lives for the first time, if they're both people decide that this is a thing that they want for themselves, then we're in problem solving mode. One of the most common problems is just that the stress, the caretakingness of it all. One of the partners has twice as much work on their plate as they used to. So there's no time for anything else. When I go to bed exhausted, when would we be intimate? The only time my spouse or partner ever touches me is to assist me. And I certainly wouldn't request anything else because look how much they're doing. Look how hard this is. I don't even know if I want to be touched. So, if this is a thing that we've decided that we want to have and we want to prioritize and we want to spend time on, then one of the big things that I wind up doing with my clients, which feels like, oh, did this need to be a speech pathologist doing this actually, is finding time, putting time for intimacy on the calendar. And a lot of people go, oh, if
Right.
it's not spontaneous, it's not sexy. If it's not spontaneous, it's not intimate. And one of the things is that intimacy begets intimacy. Once we start feeling intimate, once we know that there's more of it in our lives and in our relationship, we can have more spontaneity. I think another thing about mindset is this idea that it's all or nothing.
Mm,
This idea that we have a plan in mind and that the end goal is going to be everything being exactly the same as it was. Right? And we that's more than just intimacy. If we specifically look at intimacy, the fear that anything will be different than it was before the stroke or the brain injury. I don't
mhm,
know if I'm ready for sex, but I do miss touching. I
mm,
do miss kissing. I do miss being in bed with my partner and just being together without it being a caregiving thing or we're both exhausted. I miss the conversation and the snuggling. There's so much more to it than actually the act of sex. And then, yes, there's also the act of sex. One of the things that I often encourage people to do is put a time on their calendar, give it a specific amount of time. So don't just pick a date, actually pick a specific amount of time. You're going to be in bed together. And you're not also going to be doing the taxes, or it's not going to be a caregiver. Maybe it's not even an hour, maybe it's 20 minutes, but it's going on the calendar. We're making a priority. We're going to be in bed together. We're going to look at each other. We're going to be face to face. Nobody's going to have the CPAP mask on. We're not going to sleep. And we're just going to engage in some cuddling. You're going to touch my arm. I'm going to touch your arm. We're going to remember who we are as people who are here together. We're going to touch foreheads. There's no pressure for sex. We can ease into it over time, but we're going to have some intimate physical moments, just cuddling, just holding hands, just remembering what it is to be next to each other. Then you can build from there.
That's right. One thing I think of, and this came up many years back, I think about couples, how they need to get back to dating. And like, how does that start? That usually starts conversation. Maybe
Mhm.
it's a little handhold or shoulders are touching, sitting on, going to the movies. We can take it from that kind of concept. We can start building it.
Absolutely. Sometimes one of the things when it comes to dating that, and especially dating for partners who have already been together for a while, one of the things that I encourage from the partner who does not have aphasia is when we're having these romantic moments, you're no longer the therapist. In fact, I often wind up telling the partners, if you're going to be working on speech, pick a time for that during the day. Decide that you're going to do it for an hour and don't do it in other times. But especially when you're trying to be romantic together, prioritize the level playing field.
Your time starts when you're in bed. So if that's 8 o'clock, you have to plan everything in your day before that to get to that point. You made a point of you're not still getting dressed, you're not still doing whatever.
Find some time like before dinner or
Why not?
whatever it is
You
that's
know
going to
what?
work for you.
Maybe that's appetizer. Come up with some fun words because it's an uncomfortable conversation. Many couples, like you mentioned earlier, may never have talked about this even before the stroke, and now we're expecting them to talk about it.
Can we talk about flirting?
Ooh, I love it.
So you brought up this idea of people who are already in relationships, folks who have been married for years, really needing to get back to dating. And one of those things is flirting. I appreciate you. I appreciate your body. I appreciate that you are a person that I find attractive. And I want you to know that I am finding you attractive right now. And then also and this is actually going to lead to physical intimacy, maybe. One of the things, it's absolutely one of my favorite things to do with my clients is coming up with code words or code actions that mean, hey, you want to take this to the bedroom? Or just mean, oh my gosh, I'm really liking you right now. I see you doing the dishes and I'm going, that's my spouse. I really like them right now. But the words won't come. And so what is it going to be? I've had little elbow nudges. I've had secret handshakes. I have had a couple that has, it's not a bell. It's like some sort of toy that their grandkid had, but it's the same idea that it makes a sound. They hear that particular sound and they're like, oh, it's go time. And I just loved that so much.
That
Just
is
that,
brilliant. We're digging into stuff that any couple could use. This is
yes.
just aphasia. This is really breaking it down like we started the conversation to a human level.
There are all sorts of other roadblocks and bumps in the road that might be occurring. The really common trajectory that I and my clients take is, as a speech pathologist, if you, as the person with aphasia or the care partner, aren't working with a speech pathologist right now, somebody's going to have to be the really brave person. When we've defined what the difficulties are, maybe this has allowed you to come up with one or two things that you're like, these are also challenges that I or we are having. How can we problem solve this? So maybe one of the problems is that we don't feel emotionally intimate and tied together anymore, that we don't feel like we were the people that we were when we were dating. Can we have moments of that? Even if our whole life cannot shift exactly back to where it was before, can we find moments of calm? Might be finding a time together where it's just the two of us. This comes back to scheduling things, right?
Yes,
Like scheduling that 20
yes.
minutes, that hour in bed together. One of the partners might be like, I can't do that if I know that the dishes are dirty in the sink. What do we also need to do in advance of this moment so that we can
So
feel
smart.
calm?
Yes.
And then the care partner might be like, okay, so you're saying I should do the dishes earlier in the day. I don't have time. You're telling me that I should add an extra 20 minutes, an extra hour to my day that I don't have. What can we do to make that? What is it that we're
Start making
prioritizing?
a little space, and maybe that's something to look forward to. Maybe that's something to that takeout is what precedes,
Mm,
and maybe that's just a little special thing that you do
yeah.
to make that space, reduce some of the stress and schedule.
Yes.
Win, win, win.
And occasionally the person who doesn't have aphasia has taken over everything and they're still doing all the stuff that they used to do too. So we already talked about, are there nonverbal ways? Are there little cues that we could give to one another that don't require talking? Some parts of intimacy, either emotional intimacy or physical intimacy, are communicative, do require communication, right? Flirting needs some communications. Maybe it is a touch on the shoulder, maybe it is a hug that we haven't had that physicality, and that will create more physicality in the future. That creates more emotional intimacy in the future. Maybe if the person with aphasia uses a communication device, if they benefit from having certain words or phrases that they have practiced and practiced, could we make sure that those words or phrases for intimacy, A, make sense for them,
Mhm.
but really align with who they are as a person? What could we practice? Could we add to the communication device? What could we have a little sign for if it's just not coming out in the moment that could help with that communication? And usually we stop there for a while until my clients are more connected, are feeling more physically intimate, are doing a little bit more huggy, kissy, touchy stuff. And then we start talking about what is actually going on in the bedroom in terms of communication that we need to be able to speak about. My clients usually have some physical changes that if anybody's talked about physical intimacy, if anybody's talked about sex with them at all, which is rare, usually they've said, "The right side of your body doesn't move as well as it used to." Play around with it. Make sure talk to each other about it.
Yeah.
I try to work with PTs about this and OTs about this, but often one of the things that I'm talking with my clients about is just how do we communicate that something feels good? I have found that just bringing the topic up, having the partners bring the topic up with each other really encourages them to be much more creative and flexible, learn about sexuality, figure out what sexuality is going to be like for them. And there's not a lot of communication in that either.
Yeah. No good
Y-
examples.
Yeah, you never watch a rom-com and they're like, what would feel good for you? That's not part of it. There's kissing, there's shirts flying, and then they cut to the people naked in bed with the sheets strategically positioned. There's very little communication involved.
Yeah.
But when the whole right side of your body feels kind of numb and tingly and you're worried that you're going to roll over on your arm, like you need to talk about it. And so normalizing that communication, starting that conversation with my clients, I find that often they can actually take that on their own. And just encouraging that check in and encouraging how can we say, this is uncomfortable for me, or oh, I need more of this, when doing any of that communication itself feels hard.
For sure.
So we often come up with signals, we come up with nonverbal cues that might work out okay in the bedroom, and that seems to help.
Finding a time where we're just gonna sit together and hold hands,
Mhm,
or finding a time to lay in bed together and just be. Put on some
mhm.
music. No pressure, nothing has to happen. What they ended up doing is rearranging the bedroom so that he could protect that right side. They got creative with how they set up the bedroom so that she could lay on his unaffected side and just cuddle. It took planning and thought and testing it out and getting somebody to come over and move the furniture.
I think that's such a great example because something like cuddling on the unaffected side, if you're not part of this relationship, you might think, "This is not a big deal." Like, just go to the other side. Just move your body to the other side. How is this a but, A, if you've been married for a while, you have your routine, and there's the side of the bed that you sleep on,
So true.
and
So
nobody ever said, "Hey, have you thought about going to the other side?" Legitimately, you might never do it.
almost like a mental block.
It's another thing that okay, being able to lay on your spouse's chest, such a small thing. It's those small moments of emotional and physical intimacy that you wind up missing when they're not there. But if it is there, if you bring it back, can really have an outsized impact on your feelings of emotional closeness. If you're the unaffected spouse, if you're the person who doesn't have aphasia, being able to lay your head on your spouse's chest and feel comforted and feel cared for by this person who you feel like you've perhaps been caring for quite a bit. And if you're the person with aphasia whose chest is being laid upon, being able to do that kind of caring, it's not something small.
Laura, let's wrap this up and give some action steps. What do you think we could encourage the listeners to do to start building back their intimacy after aphasia?
I think if there's one thing that you can do, my recommendation would be scheduling in a time to be in that level playing field together. And do it in a way that feels feasible to you. If that is going to start at having dinner together with the TV off and actually just looking at each other, do that. If
That's
you feel like you can take 20 minutes, an hour, put it in your calendar to actually be together and not doing something else, even if it's on the couch or the bed or wherever,
yeah.
do that because just starting is one of the best ways to start and one of the best ways to try to bridge that chasm.
Rehab ends, recovery doesn't. Rebuild communication, rebuild connection, rebuild life. This is life beyond aphasia.